wanted to talk today about the carriage drivers and the carriage horses and the carriage industry, and I wanted to help everyone understand why it's so important, in particular why it's so important to Blue Star. Originally, Blue Star was created for our horse Bud, which most people that know Blue Star by now know Bud's story. He was a carriage horse who worked in Philadelphia, and Justin and Christina and I all drove him and I learned how to drive with Bud, and Justin had a good deal of time with him, and then Christina actually worked for a good long period of time with Bud. And then Bud, he got sick and he foundered, and then he had to be stall bound for a while, and in that he developed what's called idiopathic epilepsy, which are random epileptic seizures. They're not really triggered by anything that we can figure out. We do know that diet plays a part in it. And, it's really one of those brain chemistry issues. So what was required for Bud was retirement at that time. So those of us that loved Bud and knew Bud, we wanted to take care of him, but none of us had land, and so we started exploring different ideas, and I ended up being able to take him onto a farm where I was working. And during that period of time is when Christina and Justin and we would meet. Christina and Justin would come and visit me, and we would talk about what it might be like to create a sanctuary for workhorses. And in investigating that, we discovered that there's really no such place, technically, that is really a public place where working horses can be retired, that also provides a kind of education around the lives of working horses. And being that there's so much misinformation around the workhorses about whether or not it's good for them or any of that, we really wanted to create a kind of project where we could help the general public understand what really is good for the horses. And having been carriage drivers ourselves, we knew that this is a job that these horses really do love, and they grow to love. They love the routine, they love the care that they get. It's a life for them. Many of the horses that are working in the carriage companies are horses that have come off Amish farms. I mean, there's no place breeding special carriage horses. These are horses that have come from other lives prior, and in many cases, these carriage people or carriage companies are saving these horses and giving them a second career. So we wanted to talk about all that stuff, having known them as well as we did, and also having enjoyed our working life with them. It's really quite special to have a working relationship with a horse. There are carriage companies and drivers all over the world, and we have some things in common, and there's things that make us really unique. All carriage drivers are pretty special in that they choose to do that type of work. It's not easy work at all, and in another episode we're going to go through what it would be like to be a carriage driver for a day, meaning grooming the horses in the morning, taking them out on the street, what it requires, the skill you need to have to be on the street, and then giving the tours, all of that. It's quite more than people realize, and there really needs to be a certain amount of love and care to be able to even want to do something like that. Some people think that it's, the people that are critical of the industry say that a lot of the guys who do this are random guys and bad actors, and that's just not true. Many of them are second and third generation carriage people, and they're carrying on traditions from even the 19th century, and they're holding knowledge about the cities they work in that many people don't know, because you come to know a lot of obscure history when you're working as a carriage driver. When you have to teach history every single day, you learn all kinds of things about the city that you're in. So carriage drivers can know quite a lot of things, and they can be really special, and everybody's unique and different and has their own style. And there are, of course, those that stick to the traditional ways, and they dress in the traditional clothing and wear the traditional hats, and then there's others that are more like pirates and do it their own way. But all of them are special. So we'll get in more to what that's all about in another episode. But we wanted to create something that specifically addressed the issue of working horses, whether they be working in the cities or whether they be working in agriculture, and how important it is for them to have a job, just like it's important for us to have a job, and why different breeds especially is so important for them to be using their bodies in the way that they're designed to in order to keep them healthy. And so it's meaningful because right now there's a whole movement to remove the working horses from the cities in particular. And who knows where it'll go after they're able to accomplish that. It could be that they go after the horses that are eventing horses. I mean, fundamentally, the people that are against the carriage drivers are against any relationship with the horses at all. And they really see the carriage driving in particular as extremely abusive, when in reality it's one of the easiest jobs for horses. It's far harder for horses to do riding and jumping than it is for a horse to pull a carriage. And there's physics. There's, physics behind that. There's reasons why that's so. So we're passionate about it because we're really concerned that a group of people that have really no information and use a lot of manipulating of the truth and actually invent stories or lies are able to attack hardworking people that are out there trying to make a living. And we're concerned that the general population doesn't really understand what's going on there. And when they hear abuse, they naturally side with the ones that are screaming abuse because they don't want abuse for animals. And what's going on is now there's a whole movement to remove these horses from their jobs, and if that were to happen, not only would these horses be losing their jobs and these people that have the companies be losing their industry, their businesses, and all of that is a tragedy unto itself. We would be losing a very important part of who we are in America. And I'll get into describing that better, but just to sum it up, to give you an idea, when we first settled here in America, and we first started establishing ourselves here in our settlements, we began using the footpaths that the Indians had used, when they moved around. So then we created our own paths and roads through, and all of this was based on trade and things that commerce and hunting. All we needed to have different pathways to get to different places. That's how we moved around. When we started bringing our horses over, we started using our horses to go on these pathways, and then we started using carts and pulling our carts along these roads. So they later would become roads, and then it became very big industry to move goods from one place to another, and then the timing of getting these goods from one place to another. So as we started to progress, prior to the industrial age, we started to create roads that could, facilitate big wagons or not so much carriages, but hauling wagons to get through or carts to get through. So the roads became a really big issue as they were the webbing and the ways for people to move around and get from one place to another. So pre-industrial, we had roadways worked out, and none of them were comfortable. It's back in those days when you did a ride on a stagecoach from one place to another, you would end up at the end of that trip all beat up because the roads were really bad. So the roads became a real focal point in the mid-1800s, or sort of 1830s, 40s, about how we can make these roads better to move the goods along the roads better, to move people along the roads better, how we could make the roads better. So the roads were always developed and bettered for the sake of the horses. And I should say here that our government tried to use other animals for moving its goods around and moving peoples around. There was even a whole chapter in our history where the government created this, proposed that we use camels for a lot of this work, because camels were actually really well designed to move goods out in the West, and they did it so well in the Middle Eastern countries, so they figured they'd import all these camels and that we would start to use them. They may be the more efficient way, and there was a whole bunch of Congress people behind promoting these camels and a whole movement to use them, and then possibly use them in the military also. And it turned out that our men, our teamsters who were horse people, didn't know how to drive camels, and there's a certain finesse you have to drive camels, and the Arab people knew. So when the Arab people would come over to train our teamsters, it became this thing where our teamsters were getting kicked and spit at, and camels can be aggressive, as mild-natured as they are. They can be really obstinate, and unless you know how to work with them. And so these Arab people were trying to train the American people how to drive, and a lot of times the teamsters with their machismo didn't really appreciate this person in a turban telling him how to drive these camels. It was just all too foreign. So it was really a cultural choice on our part to stay with our horses, even though it wasn't always the most efficient thing. We wanted to work with our horses. So the horses became our mode of transport, our prime movers in the building of our country. In the beginning of the industrial age, they became even more so important because they would get the goods to the trains, to the places where things, and to the canalways where goods were being moved in bigger and greater amounts. So